right, thank you everybody again for joining for this panel. Our next panel is titled The Fight Against Alzheimer's Innovation and Treatment. And our moderator is Paula. She is the founder of Legacy Medsearch and a member of the board of directors for the Central and North Florida chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. So we are super excited to continue featuring innovation in the Alzheimer's space and raising awareness and support for this disease state. And a lot of that is because of the work that Paula and her team have done to help bring that focus to the community and the work of the innovators that are on stage here. So Paula, looking forward to this conversation. Thank you again. Over to you.
So I'm wearing purple today, which of course is the color of Alzheimer's. And I mentioned it last night. I wear hats because of my mom. My mom passed away of Alzheimer's in 2019, and at one point she had 600 hats. So I started wearing hats as an homage to her, and it just kind of turned into a shtick. And also is great if I'm having a bad hair day. So I'm very excited about our panel today. And as a member of the board of directors of the Alzheimer's Association in the state of Florida, I will tell you off script that I believe that medtech is going to be the thing that solves the Alzheimer's and dementia equation. I'm very excited about our panel today, and so if you can take a quick introduction. I will say that Marc and I have known each other for a while, and Marc is also has a family history of Alzheimer's, 5 aunts and a father. So if you could introduce yourself and your company.
Hello, everyone. I'm the CEO of Kurve Therapeutics. We are pioneering nose-to-brain drug delivery for Alzheimer's, among a bunch of other diseases. Alzheimer's is our main focus right now. It's lowest hanging fruit. But we have figured out how to get the drugs into the brain where an Alzheimer's patient will need it. And we've been running 7 clinical trials on mild cognitive impairment since the early to the 2010s. So, we've got some really spectacular results, and we're hoping to continue that. So really a pleasure to be on the panel with the other innovators, and whatever works, works. We have to pursue every avenue.
Right. Peter?
Peter, I'm the CEO and founder of Braingrade, and we develop a new form of deep brain stimulator for Alzheimer's.
Brent, you had some exciting news this morning, so you can reshare that.
Oh, sure, yeah. I'm Brent Vaughan. I'm the CEO of Cognito. Cognito is an optogenetics-based disease-modifying therapeutic platform for neurodegenerative diseases. We're currently enrolling our pivotal study in Alzheimer's. Go to www.hopestudy4ad.com. We're enrolling approximately 400 patients across 50 sites across the U.S. And so if you know anybody who would be interested in potentially benefiting from being in a clinical trial, we would love to speak to them. We were lucky enough yesterday to announce that we closed our Series B, which was a $73 million Series B, which is kind of nice. And actually equally excited in that we were able to add a new outside director to the board. For any of you that are CEOs and are thinking about how to add people on a board, so you know there's long discussions. But we were fortunate enough to get Dr. Rick Kuntz, who spent the last 20 years as the CMO and CSO of Medtronic and was instrumental in building and leading their almost $9 billion neuromodulation business. So when we think about how do we commercialize this, we've got someone on the board now who can give us some well-earned advice.
Rich.
Rich Macary. I'm the president and one of the co-founders of Sinaptica Therapeutics. We have a non-invasive, closed-loop neuromodulation approach to treating Alzheimer's disease. I'm sure I'm going to get a chance to explain more about that. I'm here particularly because we have amazing, unprecedented phase 2 data in mild to moderate patients. We're working toward a pivotal study. And this is personal for me. I come from the biotech industry. I was co-head of business development for Sarepta Therapeutics, which is a RNA-based therapeutic platform. But my mom developed Alzheimer's about 6 years ago. So I took a pivot from being in rare disease, focused on neuromuscular disease, to neurodegenerative, and had an open mind from other things that I've done to look at things outside of drug. And I've more than done that with the approach that we have with Sinaptica. So looking forward to sharing more on the stage with all you innovators as well.
Terrific. So the goal, or one of the goals of this panel is, we're all here to talk about innovation, and we've got some incredible innovators here on the stage. But I also would invite you to think about Alzheimer's and dementia in your personal lives. 1 in 3 people, 1 in 3 seniors will die of some form of dementia. It affects, we've got 6.5 million people in the United States alone, 50 million worldwide They're affected by Alzheimer's and dementia. Alzheimer's kills more people than prostate cancer and breast cancer combined. The lifetime risk for a woman over the age of 45 is 1 in 5. For men, it's 1 in 10. And between 2000 and 2019, deaths from heart disease decreased 7.3%. And this is a scary statistic. But Alzheimer's and dementia increased 145%. Those are all grim statistics. But I will tell you, at the end of this conversation with these innovators here, I am more hopeful than ever that Alzheimer's is going to be solved. So I'm going to start with a question that seems to be a little bit controversial. What causes dementia? Rich, would you start?
Okay, yeah. As I said before, this is a loaded question. Certainly, historically, the research communities looked at amyloid and tau. They were early suspects in this. They're present. They're part of the pathology of the disease. And there's other players in this, microglial activation, neuroinflammation. So there's a whole host of things that I don't know at this point that the research community has completely figured out. This is definitely a multifactorial, complex disease. But one part of it that we think is super important is the electrical side of it. And that's a part that hasn't been fully elucidated, has not been focused on as much from a research perspective, except for some of the people on the stage and their scientific co-founders. So I continue to look at this as a puzzle to be solved, with the electrical side of this disease being a super important part of how we're eventually going to slow and hopefully halt the progression of the disease going forward.
Peter, you have a little bit different take.
Yeah, I often say it doesn't matter. What matters now most is that we can do something about it and that it has an outcome for the patient, what changes their life.
And Marc, because you're in all different types of CNS clinical areas, could you distinguish between what is Alzheimer's and what is dementia?
Well, the best way for me to keep it straight in my head is Alzheimer's is just another flavor of dementia. But, the idea of how we're going to treat these things, Kurve Therapeutics is a technology platform, and we've done 20 to 25 different formulations for CNS diseases. But we found different results within Alzheimer's with the different drugs. So, one drug does a better job on verbal fluency, short-term memory, and attention span. The other one does a better job of clearing out the detritus in the brain. Rich mentioned the amyloid cascades, which, had been completely resolved, but their cognition didn't improve. So there's a lot of unknowns here, and that's why we want to cast as wide a net as we can. Whatever somebody has as a formulation they think would have a positive effect on the brain, we want to be the device of choice that delivers it, so that we have that opportunity.
Brent, anything to add?
Yeah, and I think the question, and to Marc's point, I think the question was worded quite interestingly, right? What causes dementia as opposed to what causes Alzheimer's, right? And I think that we've been trapped a little bit about the definition of Alzheimer's, and the taxonomy here makes a difference, right? Alzheimer's is defined by a dementia that is characterized by accumulation of beta amyloid plaque, right? And so I think if you define the disease that way, it's hard not to focus disproportionately on plaque, which is clearly correlates with disease progression. But now that what we've seen from Eisai, and I think that we will soon see from Lilly, complete removal of amyloid plaque in the brains of these Alzheimer's patients, and an exciting and moderate but not complete ability to slow the disease progression, and certainly no rehabilitation or ability to regain the plasticity of these patients, right? And so I think, unfortunately, the way that our products get approved and paid for, taxonomy matters. If you try to enroll an all-comers dementia, not otherwise specified pivotal study, I just don't see how you get that across the line with the FDA. Right? Are you going after Alzheimer's? Are you going after vascular dementia? Are you going after Parkinson's-related dementia? So I think that this is one where we've gotten trapped by the definitions that we arbitrarily created almost 100 years ago, and it's really changed the way we go about this disease. And I think your question about dementia is a highly heterogeneous population that we don't understand how to deconvolute. So the fact that any one thing is going to solve this, I think, is kind of naive.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm going to ask a question, and I'd like you to think about it. And I asked the gentlemen if I had their permission, and they all gave me their permission. But in your individual life, if you knew that you had the propensity to have an Alzheimer's or dementia, would you want to know? And secondly, would you want to do anything about it? I asked this question because at the Alzheimer's Summit back in late January, the question was posed, and it was interesting to me that the people that are leading Alzheimer's, it was a mixed bag. Does someone want to know? So, Rich, I'm going to start with you. Do you want to know? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Sure. I would absolutely want to know. And I could see why people wouldn't want to know. This is a scary disease. The idea that you're going to start to lose your memory and then eventually yourself, piece by piece, is something that people might not want to face. But knowing that there's lifestyle interventions, depending upon the age that you find out that you have a propensity to this, you want to know it, you want to start doing things about it. On the more promising note, we're at the beginning, I think, of therapies starting to reach the market after 17, 18 years of there not being therapies. And when I look at approaches like the ones on the stage, we might be getting these therapies to market in the next few years. So better to know, and better to know everything about it. I'd want to know every aspect that I could, whether it's PET scans, understanding if there's neuroinflammation, because then you start to understand what therapy might work best for you. That's how I think about it.
Brent?
Yeah, another great question. And I think some of us remember when there was the first full sequencing of human genomes. The first genome that was fully sequenced, a very famous person in the world of biology, James Watson, and the one gene allele area that he did not want to know was his ApoE4 status, right? And that was, I think that's changed a lot. I was at a conference of.
For those who don't know, can you explain what the ApoE?
Yeah, so the ApoE4 status, which is tied into lipid metabolism, which is really interesting because all of us are talking about amyloid and tau, and none of us here are talking about lipid dysregulation, which is kind of interesting. Someone probably should be. When people are homozygous for the ApoE4, they're at extremely high risk for developing an early onset, very aggressive form of Alzheimer's. And it's something that we currently have no ability to stem that tide. And so it was one of the things he actually didn't want to know about, the only thing he didn't want to know. But I was at a conference just a week or so ago with the CEOs and the head of development from most of the companies that are in late stage clinical development for Alzheimer's, and that same question was asked. Everyone raised their hand, right? Everyone wants to know. I think that if anyone's here this morning and got to hear my 4-minute mile talk with Roger Bannister, part of the reason I tell that is that after being the first to run the 4-minute mile, Roger Bannister became a neurologist, actually, so it's quite topical for us. But I think we're going to see more progress in the next 24, 36 months than we've seen in the last 20 years in this space. And so I think that's why when I was in a room with drug developers last week and I asked everybody raise their hand, because everyone wants to know, because there are increasingly, we're starting to see levers we can pull.
Peter?
Definitely. I think it's kind of this transition we are in, also kind of from this sick care to healthcare. And I only don't want to know when do I get it, I also want to know the progression. And when you talk to patients, what you're doing a lot, they want to know, how is it for me? How does it turn out? Do I have 2 more years? Do I have 4 more years? When will it decline rapidly? And it's about kind of asking here in the room full of innovators and people who are very knowledgeable in healthcare, but how many biomarkers do you really know about yourself, kind of in general? And I think it will be very common, this transition, that we know way, way more about our body as we have all the other data. I mean, the typical example is we have more data about a car or about kind of our stats on the phone than we have about our body. I don't know what my cholesterol levels are. I don't know what my blood pressure is. I not even know kind of maybe how fast my heart beats right now. But I mean, that's obviously not enough. And I think we'll find kind of way better ways to get granular information and then kind of adapt it kind of to Alzheimer's and then actually do these positive things for positive outcome for Alzheimer, what we actually also do without getting Alzheimer. So at least then we get a better reason for that.
And Marc, I know that you also would want to know, and particularly because you have the genetic predisposition in your family.
That's right. And my father was one of the ones that did not want to know. We had to force him to go. But his 5 sisters had it, and they died of it. He did not. So, I would want to know, and I just kept telling him those same things, right? Knowledge is power. You can't fix something you don't know is broken. But we're actively promoting this through Kurve Therapeutics to get tested early. We want people to get tested late 40s, early 50s, because if you display a symptom, you've had the disease for as much as a decade, right? So what we want to do is have people who are predisposed or just think that things are maybe a little off to go get tested, but there's a stigma to that. Will my employer find out, and how will I be judged later in life, and will they try to take my my checkbook away when I get older if people know that I'm predisposed to this. So we want to be able to eliminate that stigma and promote that people want to go and be checked out and get it early. When we saw that it was running in my family, when I turned 50, I just said, I'm never getting this, and I started using our technology as a preventive. And so far, no symptoms, and I'm 10 years in. So I think that knowledge is power, and you should go and check it out. But I mean, our technology is available to anybody who wants to use it today. So if you're feeling like you have it, or you're a caregiver, or you have a loved one, we'd like to talk to you.
So I want to turn to the therapeutic side after the next question. But it is interesting. We all want to know about heart disease and things that we think that we can control. And Alzheimer's and dementia, all dementias, are just so much more difficult. Every time I forget my car keys, I go, oh, is this the start? It's probably not, but it's a scary thought. I want to turn, again, before we talk about your individual therapies, to some of the pharmacological issues that have really been stymied innovation on the medtech side. So there's been, there's 3 drugs that have been approved in the last couple of years, and as Brent said, there's been more done just in the last couple of years, in the past 30 years. How have the mixed results of some of the drugs approved for Alzheimer's impeded your ability to raise funds? Brent, you're accepted here. So, Rich, I know it's been an issue for you at Sinaptica.
Well, sure. I mean, we're coming out into the space, and I heard Brent talk about this earlier, where the medtech community isn't necessarily educated about Alzheimer's disease, and thinking about this as a progressive chronic disease. You have to keep treating it. This isn't, you're going to put it in remission. So that's been a challenge, really, because you're going to investors. I come from the biotech side. I'm used to walking in there and talking about receptors and mechanisms of action, and analyzing preclinical data up through phase 1, et cetera. And so you're walking in, explaining a new modality. It's a device. They don't know. That's manufacturing. That's CDRH, very different than CDER and CBER. Different regulatory path, different reimbursement path. So we are trying to find, I don't want to say it's a needle in a haystack, but I agree with Brent. There's a group of investors that have enough knowledge about this disease and enough knowledge about medtech, to play in this space. And yes, it hasn't helped. 17 years of failure, big pharmaceutical companies literally getting out of CNS altogether, or certainly out of Alzheimer's dementia. And so, yeah, we've paid a price in some ways for showing up with data, and in our case, spectacular data that is almost hard to believe because you've had failure for so long. And here's giant drug companies barely squeaking over the line with these amyloid drugs getting statistical significance.
Expensive amyloid drugs.
Expensive amyloid drugs. And again, we believe we're a cheaper alternative, safer alternative. And so we are going to work and do what we have to do, and hopefully go down the same path as Brent has gone to raise that capital. We need to get this into a pivotal for patients.
Yeah, Brent, you're buying drinks tonight, just to let you know, since you got the money.
I bought a couple last night, but I'm not that recognizable in the bar, so I mean, Steven, that's about it, right?
If you could kind of nuance this with, Billy Dunn just retired from the neuroscience division of the FDA, which there was a little bit of a cheer, I think, from the crowd. So could you talk a little bit about the fact that, it has been difficult from both a CMS standpoint and an FDA standpoint, and how that's really, I guess, not affected you as much, but it's affected the industry?
Oh, trust me, it affected us too, right? Anyone who anyone who raises money in a market like this and tells you it was easy has just not been straight with you, right? Be clear. It's really hard. I think that I think that to the point made just a second ago, most of the expertise about understanding how to de-risk likelihood or possibility of approval for safety and efficacy in Alzheimer's lies in investors who have invested on the pharma side. So small molecules for a long time, and then more lately, large molecules, right? And yet they don't understand how devices get paid for. The people that understand how devices get paid for and get approved don't understand Alzheimer's. And so you need to find it's not the union of these two groups like I talked about this morning, right? It's the intersection. And so and I think this idea of needles and haystacks is kind of it, right? There's lots of investors out there, but there's very few that actually have the expertise on both sides to do this. And so, I mean, there's kind of two ways to do it, right? You can build a machine that processes hay, or you can try to find a metal detector and look for haystack needles, right? And so we decided to look for haystack needles, right? Try to figure out who could actually have the intelligent conversation about both of them. The downside is it's such a huge unmet need, and all of us up here have very disruptive, interesting technologies. There is not an investor who doesn't hear, wow, innovative, non-invasive technology that slows the progression of Alzheimer's 3 times more than the most recently approved drug. I want to hear more of that. Yeah. I want to hear more about that. But if there's no investment at the end of that discussion, that's time you don't get back.
Peter.
A lot of time I don't get back. Now Peter, you've seen the new drug, Biogen LSI. I think we don't need any medical device for Alzheimer's. It's like, yeah, okay. A few months later, oh, have you seen the outcome? Nothing works for Alzheimer's. It's like, and there you are in between. It's like showing that you have something, and by the way, cheaper as a medical device don't means particularly better for the investor. Because, I mean, it's a part, I mean, it's your revenue, what you want to, and then I would look at the overall view of the investor on our space, because I think we all have to care that kind of for all medical devices, we get from the limited partners down over the VCs more money in the whole system, because we are way too small and way less capitalized for what kind of power all this innovation has and what we can do good for the world. And I hope that it finds way more capitals, and there are way more good examples for that, because as many people care about Alzheimer's, I mean, there's a reason why they don't want to invest. Because when you look like in the past, not just into Alzheimer's, you also look kind of what has been the multipliers of medical devices. Yeah. It's like when you take us as an example, and 3-4 years to market, just 86 million, and then they think, okay, what's a typical exit? Maybe 400 million. So Medtronic and Boston Scientific is then going to buy kind of for market expansion. That's nothing what you want to do kind of for the risk stacking you are approaching. And then you have really this very small kind of investors who feel educated enough, who want to do it. Because a lot of say, it sounds fascinating, but I'm too afraid to look very dumb, because you're talking about brain implant and Alzheimer's and can improve even cognition. Sounds awesome, but maybe I'll join later. Yeah? So maybe the most heard phrase of, yeah.
So I mentioned there's some grim statistics regarding dementia and Alzheimer's, but I want to turn now to some of the therapeutic focus that these gentlemen have with their very innovative technologies. And Marc, I'm going to start with you. I want you to explain how the name Kurve came to be, and how the name Kurve, yeah, and how your intranasal drug therapy basically is, in your opinion, going to help solve Alzheimer's.
Well, the name of the company, excuse me, I got a touch of laryngitis, so I'm going to do my best. The name of the company came up when I ran the word sinus. I mean, we started out as a chronic sinusitis company. Nose to brain came to us organically because of our success in the nasal cavity. But I ran sinus through a language translator, ran it through 85 languages, and it came up sinus in all but German. The German translator got confused with sine and cosine and called it curve with a K. So I said, we're taking corners in the nasal cavity, so it seemed appropriate. And V&A's for the product name made sense because we're doing it by way of the nose, right? So, and our, the way the technology functions is we were just trying at the time to cure allergies and chronic sinusitis and, asthma, and try to keep it under control. And that was my quality of life being so terrible. So I just wanted to get it everywhere. So if we wanted to go up, to the right, to the left, and then take a hairpin turn and get into the maxillary sinus. We figured out how to do that. So when the nose to brain people came to us and said, can you just put it right here? It was far easier than anything we'd ever done. We did learn to tighten that deposition down so that it was mostly in the olfactory region, which has access to the brain. And that's when the changes really started to happen. And our phase 2 study with Alzheimer's with intranasal insulin had 3 out of 4 patients actually test better coming out than going in. So they had regained some measure of cognitive abilities they'd lost. The other 25% did not progress. So while we're separating from placebo as far out as 18 months, and the trend was still going up, we think that over time this is actually going to be very, very effective. And the gentlemen are right. It's a chronic progressive disease, and so you're going to have to keep using it. And so compliance is the next thing behind efficacy, right? So we got to make the patient find a way to use it. So it's going to be small, fast, quiet, and it doesn't take long. So our intranasal insulin for Alzheimer's takes less than a minute a day. And you can do it standing in front of your refrigerator and just get it done. So we've had really, really good results with insulin, and we're getting far more spectacular results with the polyclonal antibody for Alzheimer's. So, the technology platform is very robust in that it can take pretty much any formulation and deliver it into the brain. And we've done stem cells, so if anybody gets that, it's the biggest thing we've gotten into the brain so far. So small molecules are easy. Larger molecules are a little tougher, and stem cells were thought to be impossible, but we figured it out. So.
And Rich, with your background in, in the pharma biotech side, you're now working with transcranial magnetic stimulation. Would you explain the technology, how it works?
Sure. Again, it's a non-invasive closed-loop approach. When we're looking at neuromodulation, we're looking at a lot of different technologies. Ours specifically is magnetic stimulation. That's a very powerful technology. Essentially, in our therapy, we're using that technology to pulse the brain. We have an EEG on, so when we pulse the brain, we're looking at the reverberations and the propagation of that signal throughout key networks of the brain, particularly the default mode network. We're reading that with EEG. We're taking that data. We're putting it up in the cloud where we have our algorithms, a decade of research to understand what we're looking for. Each brain is unique. Each brain is different. It's almost like a fingerprint that we get, starting with healthy brains and then looking at Alzheimer's brains. We take that, we turn it into a personalized therapeutic for that individual patient. We then use neuronavigation, another technology, that allows us to precision deliver this. And this is because it's a chronic therapy, so we're going to do this over time. And again, I like to look at this therapy from that standpoint as an electromagnetic drug. Again, going back to my biotech background, instead of an IV and a needle in the arm, it's literally a coil touching the back of the head and delivering that therapeutic to exactly where it's needed in the brain. So we've used this in multiple studies and culminating in a randomized, sham-controlled, double-blinded study, a phase 2, and just literally got unprecedented, stunning results on all the key measures, CDR sum of boxes, ADAS-Cog, the stuff that I've been looking at in drug trials for 6 years, but also MMSE, ADL, all of them going in the right direction, all of them backed up by MRI data, fMRI data, electrophysiological biomarkers. So we're excited about what we've created and delivered. We're in the stage of finalizing our system so we can bring it into a pivotal trial, hopefully later this year. The market environment hasn't been as helpful as we would like, so it is hopeful seeing Brent bring home a big round of capital, and we want to follow in that path.
And, I think it's interesting. I mentioned in my opening comments that I do think that medtech is going to be part of the solution. It might be a combination drug and medtech solution as well. Have you had any issues in enrolling patients in these studies? And at what stage are you getting? Are these early stage? Are they MCI? What level or what stage patient are you trying to enroll in your study?
Yeah, so my scientific co-founders were looking at trying to get patients who are already declining. I think we know a lot of the drug development work. They've moved to the MCI, early stage mild patients, because it's hard to intervene in a process like amyloid that's been building up for 20 years and think you're going to suddenly change things that far along when symptoms have already started, when they're already getting impaired. So we kind of feel that we're intervening where there's going to be less and less drug trials, which is in these patients that are on the decline. So when you're coming at a non-invasive approach, that's a technology with a 20-year plus safety track record. You're not necessarily looking for, because we're not targeting amyloid specifically, we're not targeting tau. So you're not necessarily trying to do a lumbar puncture or any other invasive procedure. It becomes easier to recruit patients. And I'm going to say that having great data, unprecedented data, when you're out there looking to recruit maybe 200, 250 patients, I think is a big asset. A lot of these drug trials are going out there, and they're recruiting patients into large phase 3s with signals, with trends, with anecdotal stories, or with biomarkers that signal the right direction. And so to walk in there with this kind of data to do a phase 3, even knowing they might be in a placebo arm, the fact that they can convert to the therapy at the end, I think is a big, big motivator.
I absolutely agree. And Peter, I've heard you speak, I guess, at least once or twice, and I remember running up to you and saying, what you're doing is fascinating. Would you explain a little bit about what Braingrade does, how you came up with the idea? And I know that Peter's a member of Mensa, and I'm a member of the post-menopausal group, so about the same. So if you could explain about, and again, I know that you have a familiar connection with your grandmother as well.
While being a member of Mensa, I have a lot of need for improving my brain. So this Braingrade upgrade for your brain, this fascinated me immensely, because I believe if we can improve the human brain, this will be one of the key moments for humanity. It's our most important tool, and it's the only one that never got a real upgrade. I mean, it makes no sense. So coming from this angle, we thought about kind of how really to sustainable and significantly improve the human brain. And if you want to do it and you cannot connect with 83 billion neurons at a time, and I don't see a technology out there doing that, then you need to interact in the center of the brain or in the centers. So we thought about, okay, who actually has the biggest need kind of for such a technology? And when you want to do it in the centers, it's an invasive technology. So how does it look like? You have a stimulator in the chest, you pull a cable, and then you have 4 probes with electrodes at the tip. Each has 128 electrodes. The tip, very tiny. Put it in the brain, so you have 4 burr holes, and then you record and stimulate in the areas. And our work is based on research of hundreds of people, but mainly on 2 giants in the field, and the one who has done a study stimulating the nucleus basalis. It's the center of the cholinergic system in the brain. In Alzheimer patients over 2 years, Professor Kuhn, and he showed an 82% slowdown in disease progression. We call back drug, 27%, 82%, so a big difference over 2 years. And it has all these positive impacts on all the biomarkers we already discussed, kind of from glucose metabolism, reduction of amyloid beta. It's actually where drugs kind of try to target, kind of to then increase acetylcholine and overall kind of improve then the environment for the electrophysiology. But why only improve the biomarkers to then improve electrophysiology when we can directly improve electrophysiology? And for that, we are building up on the work of 30 years of Professor Hampson, one co-founder of the company, and he showed through stimulation in the hippocampus in the memory center that he can improve your memory capabilities. And with very basic stimulation, we now just have shown again in 6 patients based on his work that we can improve by 23%, and like with more sophisticated algorithms and stimulations, we're getting up like to 79, or he got up to 79% and more. What does it mean, more sophisticated? I mean, when you are there and you have this, temporal and local resolution, kind of listening to the neurons, kind of in milliseconds, you can react to it and can react to the states of the brain, and you then can fully close the loop kind of with reacting to the brain. And what I find so fascinating is, while many know deep brain stimulation from Parkinson's disease, kind of stopping the tremor, it's suppressing the brain. But what we are doing, we are helping these Alzheimer patients kind of with the increase of the oscillation of the brain waves and some synchrony kind of to enhance the brain and support it. And I think this will be a big breakthrough because it really opens for us the window and the understanding of the brain, and then we can all kind of, from the drugs and all the other therapeutics who have obviously a lot of positive sides, kind of not getting 4 burr holes in the brain, has some good sides to it. Then kind of we combine it and we can learn a lot about the brain. So I'm also very excited about the next years to come for us and the development there.
And at what stage are you recommending the implantation? What is it? Is it MCI? Is it someone that's got more of a cognitive decline?
Yeah, it's as earlier, it's better, as more there is to protect, kind of to slow down brain atrophy. An example, when you don't have anything to work with anymore, it's bad. But obviously, if I have only very soft symptoms, do I want to get a brain implant? So it could be a problem, or is a problem of our point. And now we're coming to this whole topic of patient stratification. Who really has Alzheimer's? It's what you started with. And also a question we often get, when and how. It's scientifically very difficult and interesting to answer. But when you talk to a patient who sits in front of you and says, I need it now. I know exactly what my trajectory is. I need it now. Then it's somehow irrelevant. And then you also understand, with all the neurologists we are working with, there is a clear window when patient needs it and ask for more therapies. So I think we all need to get just faster all these solutions we have here to the market, and then we find a good combination.
And Brent, your device is also fascinating to me. It's very unique in terms of what it looks like. Could you explain to the audience a little bit about what Cognito has in terms of therapies?
Yeah, happy to. And not only am I not as sharply dressed as Peter, but I was specifically uninvited to Mensa meetings. And so, so I think that similar to a couple of folks up here, we think about the target space, right? So I try to use drug language to explain what we do, because that's ultimately where most of our investors are, right? And we see, is Alzheimer's a disease that's characterized by an accumulation of pathological proteins that promotes neuronal death and degenerative dysfunction? Well, yes. Is it a disease of microglial dysregulation, which start in an anti-inflammatory activity, but then ultimately switch over to more of a pro-inflammatory and later disease? Well, yes, right? Is it a disease of electrical dysregulation across the brain? Well, it actually is. The only reason we care about these pathological proteins is they ultimately disrupt the electrical activity across the brain. Electricity is the fundamental currency of the brain, right? It determines who we are, what we are, how we are. And so I think that we see these abnormalities in electrical activities as druggable targets. And the way to drug this target is to come in with some degree of electrical stimulation that changes the brainwave activity. And so our scientific co-founders, Dr. Sy at MIT, she works at looking at novel mechanisms and targets in the world of Alzheimer's. She works with the standard transgenic models in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. My friends at Genentech like to say we've cured a lot of mice of cancer, right? But it turns out people are a little harder. right? Plaques develop in mice over courses of weeks, and they develop in patients over decades. And I think that we're starting to learn, even if you look at some of the information from Eisai, I think we're starting to think about the heterogeneity in the world of amyloid. And we might decide that amyloid plaque is the least interesting amyloid target, right? And so I think that there are layers to all this type of story. And so, what was learned in optogenetics early on was that you can use light to trigger specific brain frequency and brainwave activities. And there was just a very simple experiment done early on when Dr. Tsai looked at the relative absence of gamma frequency oscillations in the Alzheimer's brains. And this is backed up in the literature of seeing it in patients. You can see it in the EEGs in the mice. And she reached out to Dr. Boyden, who was our co-founder, who had co-invented optogenetics, and decided to use principles of optogenetics to see what would happen if you added gamma frequency oscillations back into an Alzheimer's brain. And lo and behold, it reversed the progression of Alzheimer's. It cleared the phosphorylated tau as well as the amyloid in the animals and showed improvements in the animal behavior. That was published in Nature and widely cited, was the basis for our technology. In our phase 2, we showed a 75 to 80% slowing in disease progression with 6 months of treatment. And uniquely to ours, we showed an almost complete preservation of brain volume. So brain atrophies quite quickly, and we were able to show that we're building neuronal connectivity that you can see in MRI. And if you think about this, neurologists like to say that neurons that fire together wire together. And as you start getting things to wire together, you're maintaining, and we hope ultimately rebuilding the plasticity that is lost in these patients as they suffer the onslaught of the progressive degenerative disease.
So like I said, we started with some grim statistics and some hope. I've got one quick question. We just have less than a minute left. So I'm just going to go down real quick. When do you think we're going to have a workable solution for Alzheimer's and dementia in terms of just a swag guess? How many years?
Well, again, we have FDA breakthrough designation. Hopefully, we're getting a pivotal trial off the ground by the end of the year. So thinking about a significant slowing of the disease, I believe it's when we and others get to that end game in probably the next 2 to 3 years. If we're talking about halting the progression of the disease, I do think that that's going to take a multimodal approach. But hopefully within that next 5 to 7 years, there's a lot happening. To Brent's point, there's a lot happening in the space. So I'm optimistic.
Brent?
Yeah, I think that we're on the cusp of what we're going to all look back at and call the beginning of precision neurology. In the same way that we solved cancer by being able to understand what the specific cancers are, I think that we're going to be able to start looking at, like we do, we only enroll patients that respond to our gamma frequency stimulation.
Gotcha.
And so I think we're going to subdivide, and we're going to not solve all the dementia, but we're going to start solving pieces of it in the next decade.
Peter, quick answer.
In 15 years, and we have something now. We have all these solutions, and it's just about the distribution to the patients and getting through the system. And so the system understands that we have solutions, and way, way better solutions than anything that is currently available to all of them.
Got it. In a word.
In a word, well, we're phase 3 ready. We're going to need 300 of Rich's patients to come over and take some drugs, 150 on, 150 off. The FDA has already accepted our 300 patient phase 3, so it's just a matter of paying for it. So
Great.
That's where we're at.
Thanks so much. There is hope for Alzheimer's. Like I said, I'm happy to pass along any information I have on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association. I thank you for your time, and gentlemen, thank you for your technology.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.